The morning wind was sharp as Arindor stepped beyond the dungeon gates. Though his eyes were gone, he could still feel the light on his face, a warmth that almost hurt. It had been years since he last felt the sun without the chill of chains. Every sound in the city spoke to him. The whispers of market sellers, the clatter of hooves, the rhythm of soldiers' boots striking the cobblestones, each one painted a picture in his mind. To most, he was blind. But to him, the world had never been clearer. He walked through the lower streets of Valora, where the scent of damp straw and metal filled the air. People stared at him as he passed, the ragged seer who had dared to call the king false. Mothers pulled their children aside. Merchants spat on the ground. Yet he did not stop. For the first time in years, he felt direction. Not sight, but purpose. The prophecy that had ruined him was now a compass, whispering in the pulse of his fingertips. It led him north, toward the forested borders of the kingdom. Somewhere beyond those trees, the air slept, hidden by those who had feared the truth more than death itself. The journey was long. Arindor moved through old roads and forgotten shrines, guided by the voices that echoed in the stones. He could feel memories clinging to everything he touched, the laughter of travelers, the prayers of soldiers, the tears of those who had once believed in light. At night, when he rested beneath the stars he could no longer see, he spoke silently to the gods. Not for forgiveness, not for mercy, but for patience. He had learned that truth was not a sword, it was a seed. It grew in silence, breaking through lies the way roots break through rock. The more he walked, the more his gift deepened. His touch no longer showed him only places, it revealed emotions, moments, even the faintest traces of bloodlines. A single drop of sweat on a sword could tell him who held it last. A fallen leaf could whisper where the wind had carried it from. And one night, while crossing an old stone bridge, his hand brushed against the railing, and the world around him changed. He saw flashes, not of the past, but of what was hidden. A cottage deep within the forest. A woman kneeling beside a boy with golden hair. The mark on the boy's wrist, faint but burning in his vision like fire. The air. Alive. Arindor fell to his knees, trembling. For years he had been cursed for a truth he could not prove. Now, the gods had given him proof. He rose again, his body aching, his heart steady. He followed the pull of the vision, moving through the forest where the air was thick with mist and the ground whispered with roots. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. Birds did not sing there. Even the wind moved softly, as though afraid to disturb what was hidden. He could feel protection magic woven into the trees, old enchantments of the royal bloodline. Someone powerful had hidden the child well. Arindor moved slowly, his hands tracing bark after bark, letting the echoes of each tree guide him closer. He began to sense warmth, the pulse of life, and then, silence. The silence of secrecy. Finally, he stopped before a wooden door, nearly swallowed by vines. The air around it hummed faintly with magic. He knew then that this was the place. But he did not rush forward. He simply stood there, breathing in the stillness, and let his hand rest upon the door. Images flooded his mind, a woman's face, tired yet strong, a child growing in her arms, nights spent in fear of discovery, prayers whispered to the stars. Arindor could feel her devotion. The mother had given up everything to protect the boy. He whispered softly, not in words but in thought, a prayer of respect. Then he stepped back, knowing he could not enter yet. The truth was not ready to wake. He turned east, feeling the faint trace of light in the distance, the pull of dawn. The forest began to stir with life again, as if sensing his purpose. He would wait, and he would watch. He would protect the heir without revealing himself until the time was right. In his heart, he knew that the false king would not sleep peacefully much longer. Lies always wake before the dawn. And so Arindor built a small shelter near the forest's edge, hidden among the roots of an old oak. He lived there quietly, surviving on wild herbs and water from the stream, listening to the forest's whispers. Sometimes he heard the laughter of the boy far off in the trees. It was a sound that brought warmth to his chest, a reminder of what he was fighting for. But shadows moved through the kingdom. The high priestess had seen omens in her fire. The king had begun to dream of blood and thorns. Soldiers were sent to search for the blind traitor, and their path was drawing closer to the forest. Arindor knew that his time in silence was ending. Truth was stirring again. He spent one last night beneath the oak, tracing the earth with his fingers, feeling the heartbeat of the land. Narrator, Arindor's voice. The gods gave me no eyes, yet they showed me everything. The faces of those I love. The lies of those I pity. The hope that still breathes beneath the soil of this cursed kingdom. I do not need to see the boy to know who he is. I can feel the light of his blood, the echo of his crown. The world may not believe me now, but one day, when my hands reveal him to the world, they will know that the blind liar spoke the only truth that ever mattered. The forest had a rhythm of its own, a heartbeat that pulsed beneath every root and leaf. Arindor had learned to listen to it, to trace its vibrations through the soles of his feet and the tips of his fingers. The wind whispered secrets in the language of leaves, and he had learned to understand them. Every step he took was a dialogue with the earth, every breath a communion with the hidden life of Vaelora. The boy, the true heir, remained hidden, and Arindor remained a silent guardian. He watched the forest as a shadow watches the sun, moving unseen, present yet invisible. Days merged into nights, and nights into days, marked only by the shifting patterns of light on the forest floor and the soft rustle of creatures passing through the undergrowth. Arindor had come to understand the weight of silence. Silence was not emptiness, it was presence. It was the heartbeat of things unseen. And in this silence, he learned the true power of patience. Every lie told by the false king, every deceit, every hidden truth, carried itself into the forest, and Arindor could feel it. The kingdom's corruption flowed into the trees, thick as sap, sticky with fear and blood. He learned to read the echoes of men. Soldiers passed near the edges of the forest, their boots stirring the soil, their weapons marking the air with metallic resonance. Arindor traced each one with the tips of his fingers on bark, sensing their intentions, their loyalty, their fear. Some were loyal only to the crown, others to gold, others still to darker whispers that even he could not fully understand. Yet he did not act. Not yet. Time in the forest was measured differently. A day was not a day but a pulse, a sequence of sensations, a string of vibrations running through the undergrowth. Arindor could sense when the boy stirred, when the mother prepared food, when a stranger approached the hidden dwelling. He could feel the walls of their secret home in the earth, every timber, every hidden door, every subtle sigil left to protect them. The forest itself seemed to bend toward his will, as though it recognized him as a guardian of the unseen. But even as he moved through these hidden paths, he knew the danger was closing in. The false king was not idle. Every night, Arindor felt the whispers of the court ripple through the air, carried by birds, by insects, by the tremors of hoofbeats on distant roads. Soldiers, hunters, and spies moved silently across Vaelora, leaving traces of fear in their wake. The forest was no longer merely sanctuary, it was a battleground of shadows and whispers. Arindor remembered the lessons of the old seer who had trained him as a child. Sight was not the measure of truth, touch, patience, and listening were the true senses. And in the dark, he had learned to see more than men with eyes ever could. He could feel bloodlines, deceit, loyalty, and love as clearly as he could feel the cold tone of the dungeon floor where he had once been imprisoned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest came alive with a new rhythm. The mother had grown cautious. She had heard the soft crack of twigs, the faint scent of smoke from distant fires, and the subtle vibrations of unknown boots moving through the woods. Arindor felt her fear like a pulse through the soil, and it sharpened his own senses. The air was small, unaware of the growing storm outside his safe haven, and yet Arindor could feel his own heartbeat in sync with the boy's, a fragile thread connecting them across the darkness. He moved closer, tracing the vibration of their home through roots, rocks, and fallen leaves. The boy's laughter reached him faintly, like a bell in fog. It was small, pure, and it struck Arindor's chest with a force he had not felt since he had first touched the light of dawn after leaving the dungeon. That laughter was a promise of life, a tether to hope, and a reminder of why he endured years of scorn, pain, and imprisonment. The forest, however, did not remain silent. The whispers of the approaching soldiers grew stronger, and Arindor could feel the subtle shifts in the earth, traps set by men who were not aware that a blind man could see more clearly than they ever could. The false king had grown desperate. He sent hunters who were clever, relentless, and cruel. Arindor could feel their footsteps like shadows sliding over roots and soil, their intentions as sharp and heavy as iron knives. Arindor traced their paths, memorizing the sounds, the shifts in air, the trembling of leaves under their weight. He could sense their fear of discovery, their uncertainty in the forest, their loyalty to a man who had stolen a crown but not the true blood of Valora. He watched them from the shadows, unseen, learning. He did not act, but the forest itself seemed to protect him. Vines shifted, roots tripped hunters, and birds cried out as warning. The land had chosen him as guardian. Night fell, thick and impenetrable, and Arindor finally rested near the hidden home, feeling the boy's soft breathing through the vibrations of the floor. Every exhalation, every movement, every heartbeat was a note in the symphony of life he now conducted. And yet, beneath it all, he could sense the slow crawl of time, the approach of inevitability. The false king would not remain ignorant of the heir forever. Soldiers, spies, and betrayers moved with purpose. Lies gathered momentum as naturally as rivers gather water. Arindor allowed himself one thought, one small hope, as he drifted into rest: patience. Truth moves slowly, but it cannot be stopped. The heir would live, the crown would be restored, and the world would remember that no man, no matter how powerful, can hold dominion over destiny. He lay beneath the oak, tracing the soil with his hands, listening to the heartbeat of the forest. The wind whispered through the branches like a song older than kingdoms. The boy slept, safe for now. The mother prayed silently, and Arindor, the blind seer, guardian of the unseen, prepared for the moment when shadow and deceit would collide with the touch of truth. The forest had changed. The air, once heavy with the calm hum of life, now carried a tension that made the roots shiver beneath Arindor's feet. He could feel the shift long before the sounds reached him, the vibrations of men moving with purpose, the subtle disturbance of the undergrowth, the unnatural rhythm of footfalls that did not belong to deer or wolves. The hunters had come. Arindor did not panic. He had learned patience, and patience was his ally. Every step he took through the moss and fallen leaves was deliberate, a conversation with the earth itself. The forest seemed to respond to him, branches bent subtly out of his path, fallen logs shifted with near imperceptible creaks, and the wind carried whispers of the intruder's movements. The hunters were skilled, trained to follow trails invisible to most, but the forest had chosen Arindor. He felt their presence like shadows crawling over his skin, the tension in their muscles vibrating through the soil and into his fingers. Each of them bore the mark of desperation, men sent by a king who feared the truth. Their eyes sought the hidden air, their weapons glinting faintly in the rare shafts of moonlight. Arindor moved silently, weaving through the trees, his bare feet connecting with the earth. Every moss-covered stone and fallen branch spoke to him, revealed secrets of the hunters' numbers, their weaknesses, their patterns. He knew when one of them stopped, when another stumbled, when their leader barked a quiet command that the wind carried to him like a muted echo. The heir slept unaware in the hidden cottage, a fragile life cocooned in the arms of his mother. The boy's soft breathing reached Arindor through the vibrations of the floor, a rhythm as delicate as a thread of silk. Every heartbeat of the child sent ripples through the forest, and Arindor listened to them, memorizing the pulse of life he was sworn to protect. The hunters moved closer. Their presence was a creeping weight, pressing against the living air, stirring the forest's hidden creatures into nervous motion. Owls shifted on their perches, foxes paused in mid-step, and the wind carried a subtle warning, rustling leaves as if to speak. Danger approaches. Arindor paused in the shadows, feeling the texture of the forest beneath his fingers. Each tree, each vine, each hidden root became an instrument in his awareness. He traced the vibration of the hunters' boots across the soil, predicting their movements before they made them. He could sense their fear and arrogance in equal measure, men who believed they controlled the land, unaware that it had already taken sides. The forest whispered of traps, and Arindor began to weave them. He shifted fallen branches to create noise, moved stones to guide hunters toward dead ends, and used the subtle echoes of their own movements to disorient them. He did not strike yet. Patience was his weapon, observation his shield. He allowed them to reveal themselves fully, one by one, their patterns written in the tremors of earth beneath his hands. Night deepened, thick and suffocating, and the hunters grew bolder. They spoke little, their whispered commands swallowed by the forest. Yet Arindor felt every intention, every heartbeat, every tremor in the soil. He knew which of them were cautious, which were reckless, which carried blood in their veins thirsty for power. The boy stirred in his sleep, unaware that the world beyond the cottage's walls had begun to darken with danger. The mother shifted nervously, her presence a quiet echo of love and protection. Arindor sensed the fear she carried, the tension in the air around her, and he allowed himself a moment to feel it, not to be frightened, but to understand the weight of what he guarded. He followed the vibrations of the hunters as they moved closer to the cottage. Their leader carried himself differently, heavier, marked by the arrogance of one who believed he could seize what did not belong to him. Arindor traced him in the dark, noting the weight of his stride, the tension in his hands, the direction of his gaze. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Leaves hung motionless, streams slowed their flow, and the wind ceased to carry sound. The hunters did not notice the subtle cues, the signs of the forest bending to the blind seer who waited. Arindor sensed an opening. One hunter moved carelessly, stepping on a brittle branch that creaked loudly in the quiet night. The others froze, their attention drawn to the sound. Arindor's hand hovered over a fallen log, poised to create another subtle misdirection. He let the earth speak, and the hunters responded to it, chasing shadows that did not exist. Hours passed like this, a delicate dance of patience and instinct. Arindor allowed them to come closer, to feel the forest's resistance, to taste the fear of what they could not understand. He traced the vibrations of their movements, memorizing every detail, the rust of cloth, the scrape of leather, the rhythm of the leader's breathing. By the first light of dawn, the hunters had become lost in the forest, their confidence unraveling like threads of silk. Arindor could sense their panic growing, our frustration, their belief that the child was elsewhere. He did not move toward them, did not strike. He only observed, allowing their arrogance to lead them into the traps the forest itself had woven under his guidance. He returned to the cottage as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves. The mother stirred, sensing the calm that had returned, unaware of how close the threat had been. The boy remained asleep, his golden hair glinting faintly in the morning light, his presence a beacon that pulsed through the forest and into Arindor's soul. Arindor knelt by the roots of the great oak, feeling the vibrations of life around him, the birds returning, the insects crawling, the pulse of the soil, the echoes of the hunter's retreat. He allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction, knowing that the first test had passed. But he also knew this was only the beginning. The false king would not stop. His hunters would grow more skilled, more desperate, more relentless. The world outside the forest would continue to plot and deceive, and the heir's life would remain a fragile thread in a tapestry of lies and shadows. Arindor pressed his hands against the earth, sensing the vibrations of the hidden path ahead. Every tree, every root, every stone spoke to him of the coming trials. The forest had chosen him as guardian, and he would not fail. The forest had grown restless. Night fell with a heaviness that pressed against Arindor's chest, a weight more tangible than the roots under his hands. The trees whispered in hurried voices, leaves trembling as if they, too, feared what approached. He felt it first as a vibration in the soil, faint at first, almost imperceptible, but growing stronger, closer, heavier. Hunters, not just scouts now, but men who came with purpose, trained in the art of pursuit, relentless and cruel. Arindor did not move immediately. Patience was his greatest weapon, honed by years of blindness, imprisonment, and exile. He knelt in the shadow of the great oak, letting his hands trace the contours of the earth. Every stone, every root, every fallen leaf told a story of movement. The hunters were clever, but the forest belonged to him. Each step they took released a subtle tremor, like a heartbeat, and he traced them with the precision of a musician reading a symphony. The hidden cottage lay ahead, nestled against a small clearing. Through the vibrations, he sensed the mother moving cautiously, whispering to the boy in soft tones that were both lullaby and warning. She was vigilant, instinctive, and brave, but unaware of the proximity of the hunters, who now crept closer like shadows stretching across the earth. Arindor's fingers pressed into the soil. He felt the rhythm of their hearts, the tension in their muscles, the arrogance in their stride. The false king's men believed themselves masters of the forest, but the forest had already chosen its protector. Arindor moved silently, a shadow among shadows, guided entirely by touch and intuition. He could sense every crackling branch, every displaced stone, every subtle change in the wind's direction. He knew where the hunters' attention was focused, how they divided themselves, which men were cautious and which were reckless. He allowed them to move closer, guiding them not with force, but with the forest itself. A fallen log here, a loose stone there, a branch that snapped under their weight, each small disruption sowed confusion. The leader of the hunters paused near the clearing. Arindor felt the tension radiate from him, felt the arrogance and certainty that came from believing the heir would be easy to find. But the forest had become Arindor's ally. The shadows shifted, the ground hummed under his fingers, and the hunter's own missteps began to unravel their carefully laid plans. Arindor did not attack. Not yet. The moment was not for confrontation but for observation. He watched through the vibrations of the earth, reading the hunter's intentions as clearly as any sighted man could read a map. One hunter, too confident, stepped into a narrow groove formed by roots and slipped. His companions cursed softly, unaware that their path had been subtly altered, that the forest itself had chosen deception. Through it all, the boy slept, unaware of the danger inching closer to his small bed of blankets. The mother's whispering prayers were a rhythm that vibrated faintly through the walls, connecting with Arindor's own heartbeat. The connection between guardian and heir pulsed stronger than the movements of any intruder. Hours passed in tense stillness. The hunters fanned out, searching, muttering, their movements becoming erratic under the subtle guidance of the blind seer and the forest's natural intelligence. Arindor traced each one, learning their patterns, memorizing every step, every twitch, every breath. Their leader's frustration grew. He underestimated the quiet of the night, the subtle tricks of nature, the presence of a man who could see without eyes. And then, in a single moment, the forest shifted. A small animal, startled by the hunter's approach, darted across the path, scattering dry leaves. The hunters reacted instinctively, one tripping, another drawing his blade reflexively. Arindor felt their panic ripple through the ground. The chaos he had orchestrated subtly had reached its peak, and now, the hunters were trapped in the maze of roots, vines, and fallen logs, each step further unraveling their confidence. Arindor moved closer to the cottage, careful, deliberate. He could sense the mother's tension rising, our instinct pulling her toward the window, but he remained unseen. He felt the boy's pulse, steady yet fragile, and it grounded him in the purpose that had guided him through years of blindness, exile, and scorn. Protecting this child was not just duty, it was destiny. The leader's voice cut through the forest, low and commanding, ordering the men to split, to search every nook, to surround the clearing. They were desperate now, their arrogance replaced by fear, though they did not yet know the source. Arindor felt their fear as a physical pressure, thick in the soil, vibrating in the roots, moving through the air. He pressed his hands against the earth and let it speak, letting the forest amplify the confusion he had planted. Night deepened, the forest alive with the subtle symphony of movements, vibrations, and whispers. The hunters stumbled blindly into each other, their blades catching on branches, their shouts echoing faintly as they realized the forest had turned against them. Arindor traced them all, noting the path of their retreat, the exhaustion in their steps, the slow collapse of their confidence. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, the hunters were gone, scattered back into the shadows from which they came. The forest returned to its calm, the vibrations softening, the pulse of life steady once more. Arindor returned to the cottage, kneeling in the earth near the roots of the great oak, feeling the relief and quiet of the morning. The boy slept peacefully, his mother unaware of how narrowly they had escaped. Arindor pressed his hands into the soil and closed his eyes, letting the forest's heartbeat flow into him. The first confrontation had been won, silently and without blood. But he knew the war had only begun. The false king would send others, more skilled, more relentless, and Arindor would be ready. The morning sun filtered through the canopy in thin, golden streams, painting the forest floor with patterns of light and shadow. To most, it was a serene scene, but to Arindor, it was alive with information. The vibrations in the soil whispered of unseen dangers and the faint trails left by the hunters from the previous night. Every leaf, every stone, every ripple in the air spoke to him of what had passed, and what was yet to come. He moved quietly toward the hidden cottage, hands brushing against tree trunks as if reading Braille. The boy slept still, swaddled in blankets, his soft breaths like gentle drums against the rhythm of the forest. Beside him, the mother stirred, her worry not yet quelled but softened by the calm that had returned. Arindor felt her anxiety in the vibrations beneath his fingertips, delicate yet resolute. She was brave, and yet, like the child, she remained blissfully unaware of the extent of the danger they had escaped. The forest, now awake with birdsong and the subtle stir of small creatures, was deceptive. Beauty could mask peril. Arindor sensed this immediately. The paths that seemed safe to the casual observer were often lined with treacherous traps laid by men who would not stop until they had what they sought. And the false king would not be satisfied with failure. The hunters of last night had only been scouts. There were greater forces at work, cunning men whose loyalty to the throne was matched only by their greed and cruelty. He guided the mother and child through narrow paths, careful to leave no trace of their passage. He let the forest's natural corridors lead them, feeling every subtle change in the soil, the air, the vibrations of movement. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every distant sound was catalogued, analyzed, and anticipated. The forest spoke, and he listened, translating its whispers into steps and turns, twists and pauses. Hours passed as they moved silently through dense undergrowth, Arindor's presence a constant shield against both seen and unseen threats. The mother's questions were soft, tentative, but he did not answer with words. Words might betray them. Instead, he communicated through subtle gestures, leading them with surety. The child, sensing the calm strength of his guardian, nestled against his mother without complaint, trusting instinctively in the rhythm of their movements. They came upon a clearing where sunlight fell in a golden circle, and for a moment, the tension lifted. Arindor felt the vibrations of life here to be strong and steady, the forest itself offering a brief respite. He knelt and pressed his palms into the soil, feeling for any residual disturbances, any traces of the hunters who had passed. There were faint echoes, nothing immediate, but enough to remind him that vigilance was never optional. The mother spoke again, her voice trembling. She wondered aloud if they could ever truly be safe, if the boy's life would always be shadowed by fear. Arindor did not need words to answer her. The rhythm of the forest beneath him, the faint pulses of danger, were his language. He merely nodded, confident that the path ahead would be guided by truth and instinct. The forest had chosen him as protector, and no man's greed could unseat that. As the day wore on, they moved deeper into uncharted terrain. The air grew cooler, the shadows longer, and the vibrations beneath his fingers became more complex. He sensed other presences, hunters who had been delayed, scouts perhaps, or men sent to block their escape. Arindor allowed them to pass unnoticed, guiding his steps along narrow paths where the soil and stone would conceal their movement. The forest was not merely a shield, it was, as a weapon, a labyrinth designed to protect those it had chosen. At one point, they reached a small stream. Water flowed over smooth stones, and the gentle sounds seemed to wash away the tension that had accumulated during hours of silent travel. Arindor knelt by the water, feeling the vibrations of its flow. He sensed the presence of the boy's bloodline in every molecule of the earth and water around them, a subtle, glowing truth that resonated beneath his fingertips. The child's destiny was powerful, and the forest knew it. They rested briefly by the stream, the mother tending to the child while Arindor kept watch. Every sound, every movement in the surrounding forest was catalogued, anticipated, analyzed. Shadows moved where none should have been. The air shifted with whispers of intent. But still, no direct threat approached. It was as if the forest itself had drawn a boundary around them, a protective barrier reinforced by the seer's careful guidance. By evening, they had moved far from the paths that anyone might expect travelers to take. The forest darkened, but Arindor did not falter. He felt the subtle pulse of life around them, the earth, the trees, the wind, even the distant echo of nocturnal creatures. All of it moved in a rhythm that he could interpret, that allowed him to see without eyes. The mother spoke softly, expressing gratitude and relief, though Arindor's focus never wavered. Gratitude was unnecessary. Their safety was not his reward. The forest and the child's destiny were all the confirmation he needed. He felt a subtle thrill in the undercurrent of the journey, not for victory, but for the knowledge that they had survived another day, that the truth of the boy's lineage had not been discovered, and that the forest had not failed him. As night fully enveloped the forest, they settled in a concealed hollow surrounded by dense foliage. Arindor arranged the surrounding area carefully, feeling the vibrations of the earth to detect any hidden threats. The mother and child slept, and he remained awake, listening, feeling, guarding. The forest hummed quietly around him, a living companion attuned to his every movement, reinforcing the shield he had cast over those he had vowed to protect. The forest had grown colder, the night thick and heavy with shadows that seemed to slither among the trees. Arindor felt it before he heard it, the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in the soil, the uneven rhythm of footsteps that did not belong to any creature of the wild. The hunters had returned, more cunning this time, guided by desperation and the false king's ruthless ambition. They moved in silence, their confidence disguised as stealth, but to Arindor, every intention vibrated through the earth like a whispered warning. He knelt in the darkness. Hands pressed into the soil, eyes closed, absorbing every subtle nuance. The child slept nearby, his mother resting against a sturdy tree trunk, exhaustion etched into her features. Neither could sense the danger creeping closer with the patience of a predator. But Arindor felt it in every fiber of the earth beneath him. The hunters were skilled, yet arrogant, and arrogance made mistakes inevitable. The wind shifted. A branch creaked somewhere to the left, and Arindor noted it, not a threat, but a signal that the hunters were near, moving deliberately into position. He felt the pulse of their hearts, the calculated rhythm of their steps, and the weight of their weapons. There were 4 of them, perhaps 5, moving in a semicircle to encircle the hollow where the mother and child rested. Their leader carried an aura of certainty, the belief that he could claim what was not his, that he could reach the hidden heir before dawn. Arindor did not panic. He had faced this many times in his mind, and each scenario had been rehearsed 1,000 times in the silence of his blindness. Patience was not simply a choice, it was instinct, sharpened by years of observation, by the constant need to survive in a world that had scorned him. He allowed the intruders to move closer, each step an invitation to their own unraveling. The forest was alive, a silent ally. Fallen branches, dense undergrowth, and subtle shifts in the soil created a labyrinth designed to disorient those who did not belong. Arindor traced the hunters' movements as though reading a living map beneath his fingertips, anticipating their next steps, predicting the subtle sounds their confidence would produce. The hunter's leader whispered a command, and Arindor felt it in the tension of the soil, the vibration traveling like a thread from one man to another. Then the first misstep occurred. One hunter, overconfident, stepped on a root that jutted out at an impossible angle. It snapped under his weight, a sharp, echoing crack that cut through the night. Arindor felt the ripple of panic spread instantly, like a wave traveling through the soil. The others froze, voices hushed but tense. The leader cursed softly, unaware that the forest itself had claimed the first victory. Arindor rose slowly, careful not to disturb the hollow. He traced the vibrations of the hunters as they recovered, noting every twitch, every hesitation. He could sense which man would panic first, which would falter, which would lead the others into error. It was not violence that would protect the heir tonight, but cunning, patience, and the guidance of the living forest. The hunters moved again, this time more cautiously. They spread out, their senses sharpened by fear, yet they could not shake the growing tension that vibrated through the ground. Arindor allowed them to close in partially, guiding them through a maze of natural obstacles, subtly amplified by his touch on the earth. A fallen tree here, a shifted rock there, and the hunters were slowed, confused, and increasingly wary. Then the leader made his second mistake. He underestimated the terrain, stepping onto a soft patch of moss-covered soil that concealed a hollow underneath. The ground gave way just enough to throw him off balance. He cursed loudly, and in that moment, the forest seemed to move as one, vines brushing against boots, branches catching arms, roots tangling legs. Panic rippled through the group. Arindor could feel the shift in their confidence, could sense the mental unraveling as the hunters realized that the forest itself was working against them. He remained a silent guardian, invisible and untouchable, a presence felt only through the trembling of the ground. The child stirred slightly in his sleep, but not enough to awaken, not enough to disrupt the fragile rhythm of safety Arindor had woven around them. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by the soft sounds of men tripping, muttering curses, and stepping cautiously through obstacles they did not understand. The leader's frustration became palpable, his confidence crumbling with each misstep. Arindor allowed them to continue, guiding them through a series of subtle traps without ever revealing his presence. The forest had become a living labyrinth, and the hunters were blind within it. As dawn approached, the hunters were exhausted, frustrated, and lost. Their plan had failed before it had begun, and the forest hummed with quiet satisfaction. Arindor returned to the hollow, kneeling beside the mother and child. He pressed his hands into the soil, feeling the vibrations of the earth steady once more. The threat had passed for now, but the war was far from over. The forest was alive with the quiet promise of dawn. Light spilled over the treetops in delicate waves, brushing against leaves and casting patterns of gold and green across the ground. Arindor felt it before he could see it, the subtle shift in the soil, the pulse of the earth, the rhythm of life moving through every root and stone. There was a sense of completion in the vibrations, a feeling that the long struggle, the hidden battles fought in shadow and silence, were finally reaching their resolution. The boy stirred in his sleep, a gentle flutter of movement that sent faint ripples through the air. Arindor traced them with his hands, as though feeling the very thread of the child's destiny. This boy, hidden, protected, and yet born of greatness, had endured trials he could not yet understand. But he had survived. That survival was no accident, it was the forest, the blind seer, and the quiet resilience of truth intertwined, working together like the notes of a masterful symphony. The mother sat nearby, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but alight with hope. She had learned patience, courage, and faith in the unseen. Through whispered prayers and silent guidance, she had kept her child safe in the face of threats she could barely comprehend. Arindor could feel her relief radiating through the earth, strong yet tender, and he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The false king's forces had been driven back. The hunters, scouts, and spies had either retreated or been turned aside by the unyielding cleverness of Arindor and the living forest. No sword had been drawn unnecessarily, no life wasted. Violence had been replaced by wisdom, strategy, and the subtle power of the unseen. And now, the forest hummed with a new energy, a recognition of the heir's emerging truth and the restoration of balance long disrupted by greed and deception. Arindor moved quietly beside the mother and child, his hands brushing against the earth as he felt the contours of the land. The boy's destiny, once hidden, was now illuminated in the vibrations of life around them. There was no longer fear in the forest, only readiness, anticipation, and the quiet strength of guardianship fulfilled. The earth itself seemed to acknowledge the rightful heir, every tree, stone, and stream resonating with acceptance. As the sun rose fully, spilling light across the clearing, the boy awoke. His eyes, wide and curious, reflected a dawning awareness of the world around him. Arindor guided him gently, teaching through touch and presence, showing the child the subtle rhythms of life, the pulse of truth beneath the surface of things. The boy's small hand rested in Arindor's, feeling the quiet power and certainty of one who had walked through shadows and emerged unbroken. The mother watched silently, her heart full, her eyes brimming with tears she could not restrain. The trials of years, the fear, the hidden dangers, the nights spent in suspense, were finally behind them. The forest had been their shield, and Arindor their unwavering guide. The heir was safe, alive, and awakening to the truth of his birthright. The false king's reign was no longer secure. The news of his defeat in the shadows spread, reaching ears that had long awaited a return of justice. The rightful heir, guided by a blind seer and protected by the forest, was now a living promise of hope, a beacon that would illuminate the kingdom and restore the balance that had been lost. Arindor knelt, pressing his hands into the soil one last time, feeling the forest breathe with relief and anticipation. The boy's pulse beat steady in his arms, synchronized with the rhythm of the land. He had not only survived, he had triumphed. The darkness that had pursued them, the hunters, the threats, the false king's schemes, they were shadows now, dissipated by truth, patience, and resilience. Narrator, Arindor's voice. The journey has ended, yet the story continues. Darkness will always test the world, but truth cannot be silenced, and destiny cannot be denied. The heir awakens, the kingdom breathes anew, and I, the blind seer, have fulfilled my vow. There is peace in the forest, in the earth, and in the heart of the child. Shadows have passed, and light endures. The first rays of sunlight touched the boy's face, warm and gentle. He smiled, unaware yet of the full measure of the legacy he carried, but already connected to it through the quiet guidance of his protector. Arindor rose, extending his hand to the mother and child, and together they stepped forward into the forest, into the morning, into the new era that awaited them. The birds sang, streams whispered, and the forest seemed to hum in celebration. All around, life moved with a rhythm restored, and the blind seer knew that his task had been completed. The rightful heir had emerged, safe and unbroken, and the kingdom's heart beat once more with hope. And so, beneath the golden light of a rising sun, the journey concluded, not with fanfare or bloodshed, but with quiet triumph, steadfast guardianship, and the unyielding power of truth. The heir would rise, the kingdom would flourish, and the forest would forever remember the blind seer who had guided destiny with patience, wisdom, and unwavering courage.